So I am joined by Mayfair Winston Clement this week, and I am so excited. Welcome, guys, to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
Hey, we're good. Yeah,
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I've just said to you guys, I've had to rejig a few of the questions that I usually ask people because obviously there's two of you that I'm talking to this week, where usually it's just one person. And actually, as someone who gets to interview people, it's such a different dynamic, and I'm quite looking forward to seeing how it turns out.
It'll be fun. We're excited.
Yeah, me too. So the first question that I usually ask every single guest is, and this one's going to be more directed at you, Winston, is how do you refer to your disability?
Oh, good question. So, and I think this is something that we've spoken about recently, just a few days ago. And I think sometimes there's quite an interesting connotation with the word disability. So for a lot of people, that brings up a lot of maybe discomfort, because that tends to come with a lot of stereotyping or people just wanting to avoid the word altogether. And I think for me, I've got to a place where nowadays I look through my disability through the lens of the social model of disability. So the disability is not who I am, but it's a consequence of how the world is set up for people in my situation. And so I guess to answer your question, I would describe myself as disabled, but more in the context of disabled because the world hasn't got the things in place to allow me to access what anyone else could access.
I think that's such a, and I always say it's a key point, particularly talking around models of disability, because what people don't seem to realize is that society is not set up for the disabled, at all. Because, and I always think of the best way that I can describe it to someone who's never ever spoken about the social model of disability before. When an architect builds a building, the first thing that they think of is stepping inside the building. What they don't think about is, what if you can't step inside the building?
It's a really good way to describe it. Yeah.
What if you don't have the ability to use your feet? What if you have to have mobility aids? There's a whole host of other things that go into not necessarily stepping into a building that nobody seems to understand. And I really love the fact that you talk about disability through the social model, because actually it's such a key part of disability and disabled people's lives, that actually spreading almost awareness of what the social model is so important.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And I think when people begin to, at least in my experience, start to develop this mindset of understanding, the social model, and even the difference between the social model and the medical model, which is what we're more accustomed to. So we're more accustomed to seeing the disability as a medical condition, or seeing the disability as, this long list of things that a person in a wheelchair cannot do, for example. But I think when we move more towards the social model and thinking about how we can affect the environment and also our attitudes, I think that then moves it to be more progressive.
Yeah, for sure. And so I would love to know, how did you guys meet?
So we met actually at it was an event for my life coach. At the time I was training to be a life coach, so I also had a coach. She was running an event in London, and Winston happened to be invited to that event as well, so we actually met there. But funnily enough, we didn't actually speak at that event. So I guess we kind of met, but that's not where our connection kind of started. And then after that, I messaged him because I didn't get a chance to speak to him. They had a short networking section, but we didn't get to speak. And I had seen some of his TED Talks, and I'd heard about him through my coach. And I just messaged him and say, hey, I think what you're doing is really cool. Sorry, we didn't get to catch up. And then you invited me for lunch.
I love that. That's such a slick way of doing it, isn't it? It's not like we're going for dinner. It's not like we're going for drinks. We're going for lunch. So this could be business, but it could also be pleasure. But we won't know until we get there.
The lunch for yourself. No, it's good.
Yeah, definitely.
I just love that so much because it's such a good way of approaching it. Like, is it business? Is it pleasure? Like, if sparks fly, they fly, but if they don't, like, it's a business lunch.
Exactly, like it's undefined, so then yeah.
Yeah. And for you guys, obviously you guys share your life on social media. And I was wondering, what is life like for you guys as an interabled couple?
Yeah, really good question. Big question as well. I think I guess maybe there's different perspectives to it. I think from our perspective, life as a interabled couple is what we know
Yeah.
and what we're familiar with. So to us, it's not maybe as sensational as somebody looking from the outside in. But I think the way we started sharing our lives on social media was after we got engaged and then married. We posted a couple of pictures and videos on social media, and basically they were viral.
Yeah.
And I think for us that was a little bit confusing or surprising because we were just sharing, these special moments like everybody else does when they get engaged and when they get married. So for it to start, reaching, hundreds of thousands and millions of people was a bit like that. And then I think from there, what we also started to notice as well was that there were questions and there were comments. And I guess what that kind of highlighted for us was that there was a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of mystery in a lot of people's minds as to what really happens in an interable relationship. So we kind of decided to build a platform addressing some of those topics.
Yeah, and I guess like through our channel, you can kind of see like that's a big thing that we try and do is like pretty much normalize interable relationship, because day to day, like we don't think it's that different to like many other relationships, except in the sense that like, when you're with someone, like you have to learn about them and everything that comes with them, different support that they may need. And of course, with Winston being a wheelchair user, like there's different things that I've had to learn, or ways that we might adapt the house so that, the tea is on a lower shelf so he can make a cup of tea, or like we might have to change things in the bathroom so that, he can do that. But I guess like when you're together, like you want to make provisions for the person that you love so that they can be empowered to do whatever they want to do. So for us, that's the lens that we kind of look at it through. I think it's when we kind of like interact with the world like around us, whether that's on social media or like going out, that's when we're kind of reminded that like, like maybe like people do view this as like, quite different.
I think what's so interesting, and I've said this before, and it was so I can't remember who said it to me, but as soon as they said it, the penny kind of dropped in my mind. And it was that I personally forget that like being disabled isn't the norm. Like if I'm in like my home, or if I'm like doing my work, or I'm like in the gym or whatever, like I completely forget that being disabled is not the norm until it's either like pointed out to me, or I look around and I'm like, oh, like nobody looks like me. And that's, I think it's, kind of similar with you guys, is that like, in your home, like there's no difference, because like you guys forget like it doesn't exist. Not that you forget it doesn't exist, but like it doesn't exist in your home, and there's no difference. And it's so right what you say, is it's the outside looking in that makes it something else. Because you're having to try and explain is not the right word at all, but you're giving a different glimpse into what an interabled relationship looked like. And beforehand, like let's be really honest, before social media, like this type of relationship would never have been seen in a million years.
That's so true.
And, like how valuable is that for like disabled people to see like a beautiful, flourishing, loving relationship? Like how lucky are we that we get to view your relationship through that lens? Like, is that not amazing for like the whole world?
Yeah, and that's really our hope, that like I guess like through documenting our journey in like 5 years time, 10 years time, like it won't be like a thing or like anything that like extraordinary. So yeah, that's really like the hope.
And I love that as well, because I think so many, especially younger kids who, I've said this, God, I've been saying that quite a lot recently, is that when I was younger, I didn't see anybody who looked like me in anything. Like that doesn't matter what it was. It could be books, magazines, TV, movies, whatever, and it's still not really there. But particularly in relationships, it's something that was never seen. Like disabled people in relationships was not a thing. And I think that's why I'm so like, firstly, like I'm so grateful that you guys have come on to talk about this, because I know that this conversation will help so many people. But secondly, like it's so fun to talk about it in a way that actually is like, guys, there's no difference. Like actually the difference is a kind of bollocks. Like
exactly that.
Which is like so nice.
No, I was just gonna say that I think you're right, because there are certain things that seem to be considered almost off limits for people with disabilities, and I think on that list, relationships is probably the top one. And I think there's a lot of I guess it's almost like a taboo topic, like should disabled people be in relationships in the first place, and if they are, then it must be something really weird happening behind the scenes for it to work. And I think that kind of manifests itself in the types of stereotypes and the types of questions that we've come across and we've experienced, whether online or in person.
Yeah, and especially because I think what you said is so true about relationships almost being taboo for disabled people, is that for the non-disabled it's almost like the person with the disability, if you're we're going to say like non-disabled and disabled, that person with a disability in society's eyes is seen as like a burden, or the able-bodied or the non-disabled person is the carer. So actually, like, it's not like an equal relationship. That doesn't exist. It's almost like 70-30, 60-40, 50-50 doesn't exist. Like that split doesn't exist.
That's a really good point, and we see that like perpetuated like all the time, like when we kind of like post things, like whether it's like when we initially got married, it was, oh, like she must be a gold digger. Again, that assumption that like being with someone like who's non-disabled is less than, so there must be something else going on there. Or if I'm, to me, like pretty basic stuff that I imagine like most people do in their homes, like I might be like cleaning, but then because people have that lens and that that notion that they already have around like disability and that dynamic, it's like, oh, she must be super tired, like she's gonna burn out like mentally and physically, because it's that notion that like like one of us is a burden, which obviously just isn't the case.
And I love the fact that you guys highlight that on social media, because I think it should be highlighted a lot more. Like young disabled people in general, we all deserve happiness. Like,
absolutely,
why not? We can have to go around.
Exactly.
Definitely.
So you guys have just recently had a child, and I would love to talk about what it's like parenting as an interabled couple, because I've spoken to quite a few disabled parents, and I love getting their perspective on things, because I'm thinking about my own future here and like when I'm going to be a mum, and I'm like, what does that look like for me? Because I don't know what it looks like, because I haven't seen it. So I'm trying to like gather all the information that I can off loads of different people. And so what has that experience been like for you guys?
It's an interesting question, because it's almost one of those, because this is my first time being a parent. I haven't got anything else to compare it to in a way. But I think, kind of going back to what we were talking about, some of the off-limit things for people with disabilities, definitely romance is one. Definitely starting a family is another one on that list. And I think since we've sort of stepped into this new chapter with parenthood, we've seen again, a different type of comment coming through on, especially on social media, because that's where a lot of our work is. And, initially, when my wife got pregnant, it was, oh, he cannot be the father. So I cannot be the father because
I know, it's crazy.
I'm a person with a disability. And then, oh, when the baby was born, it was, oh, okay, well, then it must have been IVF. So like all of these like continuous assumptions are things that maybe would be a little bit different to a non-disabled parenting situation.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, one thing that we're trying to think about, which to be honest was pretty disappointing to see, like wasn't readily available, was like just accessible equipment to allow like disabled parents to be like as involved as they would want to be. Like I think we found like one, and you know, like we managed to make it work, which is what I imagine like most interabled like couples do. Like, you know, we found things that were, you know, designed, for example, mothers who had C-sections so they could be lowered, and you know, that was suitable for Winston to be able to see Malika. But it was really hard to find things that were like specifically adapted, you know, for wheelchair users. But again, it's just that thing of like, you kind of like make it work. Like even now, our daughter recently got she now has her own bedroom like with a cot, and obviously you can't lower the side because like as they get bigger, like it can be quite dangerous if they can lower it themselves. So I was kind of worried about like, oh, like, am I going to have to be doing the night shift? Because I'm still not going to be able to like reach over and like get her. But he like finds a way, like he'll give her like her bottle like through like the little like hole thing. So kind of just like find a way to make it work, and day to day it doesn't affect us. But we would hope that like in the future there are more options to make it easier for you know, disabled parents to be as involved as I imagine like they want to be.
Yeah.
I think what both of you've just said separately brings up two really important points. Is that number one, that like the availability to access doesn't exist, and then that goes back to what Winston just said about, you know, disabled people can't like be intimate, and that seems to be like a running theme throughout. So as we get on during this podcast, I'll ask you a question, and you guys will like keep this in mind, like why I'm talking about this, because the question's going to come up that relates to this. But it seems to be that a lot of people, particularly like the public, let's just like call the public, seem to be very obsessed with the fact that disabled people can't be intimate. And if they are, then there's like some kind of kink or some kind of like something that's not necessarily like quote unquote perceived as normal going on there. And so the fact that like a disabled person has a child is almost like shocking to the core.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, like even there was one time like in person, like a lady you kind of just have to laugh at these stories because like they're just like so funny. Well, our daughter looks just like Winston, so most people are like, oh, like, wait, that must be like her daughter. But anyway, she kind of came up to us, she was like, oh my gosh, like my daughter works at an IVF clinic. And I was like, oh, okay, like that's cool. And then she's like, yeah, like, that's really cool, like I've never seen that like in person. And then I kind of was just like, oh, like what do you mean? And she was like, oh, you know, because like, you know, that's how you guys, and it was just like a really strange interaction. But it is that notion of like, one, the assumption, but then two, like the, I guess like the othering, and like people feeling like they can ask things that would otherwise be like pretty private, like especially that you wouldn't ask a stranger. So yeah,
honestly, like some of the questions that people get asked, it never fails to blow me away, because it always tends to be like something so far out there.
Yeah,
and I always think like what made you think of that, and also what made you think that it was acceptable to ask that question? Like, where were you raised?
honestly.
And so obviously, like, we spoke about how you guys started a YouTube channel, but was the whole reason that you guys made that, is that because of the comments and like the way that your information went viral? Is that why you guys decided to start sharing and like posting all your stuff there?
Yeah, I guess that was the initial, I guess, trigger for us to start sharing content. But I think there's also a part of us that, you know, is using this as a way to almost create memories. So for now, for example, it's going to be really cool for our daughter Malika to look back in a few years' time and see all those videos from, you know, when my wife was pregnant with her, or you know, special moments that we shared with our family. So I think it's become a combination of something that is mission driven for us to create a world that is more inclusive for people with disabilities, and at the same time just an opportunity to document some of the special moments you know, especially for Malika and any future children that we have.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know that you guys recently just moved as well. And so I was wondering, like, what's it been like for you guys in terms of how other people have perceived you in two different places? Have you noticed a difference?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to think how much we paid attention.
Yeah. So we moved, I guess for context, we moved to the US.
Yeah, from
and
London.
yeah, so we lived in London before, so that's where we both grew up. Well, I grew up in London, you grew up in Reading. So we kind of did our education and grew up most of our lives in London. And then about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago now, we kind of packed up our lives and jumped over the pond, and we're now based in Atlanta, USA. I guess in terms of, and I hadn't really thought about this until now, but I feel like the attitudes of people in the US, at least in the South, which is where we are, people tend to be a lot more open and friendly and more likely to say hello than at least what I've experienced growing up in London. And I know London is sort of a bubble, you know, on its own. Maybe if you go up north, you know, people are a bit more friendlier. But I think I've experienced that willingness to kind of just not read too much into your situation and say hello, ask how you're doing, ask how your day's going, ask me, you know, how old, you know, my daughter is, say that she looks exactly like me. You know, I feel like in England sometimes they would overthink that situation and prefer not to say anything.
Yeah.
I think it's like that makes me giggle a bit that in England, like they overthink the situation, because I think like the British thing is to like try not to be rude.
Yeah.
However, in trying not to be rude, you can come across as being really effing rude.
That's very British.
And like, yeah, and it is, isn't it? Like, it's so British. You think about people overthink about what they're going to say, and then if they scuff it up, they like backtrack, and it's all just a bit of a disaster. But I think it's really interesting that like America for you guys has become like it's more open, and that's like lovely for everyone to have, right? Is that everybody wants that experience. And I think you know, London in itself is a bit of a bubble, and like you can get very caught up in the London life if you're not careful.
Definitely.
So I ask everybody this, and it's for both of you, and it's a twofold question, and I always ask, what piece of advice would you give a younger version of yourself? And what piece of advice would you give a younger person with the same disability as you?
I mean, I can answer the first part. I think the advice I'd give to my younger self is if you see something that should be better or different, try and make it better or different in the way that you can do. Whether that's like by using your voice, and like saying like, hey, like I think that should be different, or like how come like this person isn't able like to be involved in this game, like just speak up, like use whatever you have, whether it's your voice, your connections, like your knowledge to make something better, you know. Try, because I think that's one of the biggest blessings that I've been able to have. I've always been kind of interested in social justice, but of course, you know, meeting my husband and like seeing his lived experience of like disability, and it makes me more aware of things that I might not otherwise think about, like, you know, flying, for example, and all of the different, you know, can come with like if you use a wheelchair. But yeah, I'd say that advice would just be like to, if you speak up, like that's allyship, and like all of that, you know, kind of makes a difference, even if you think it's a small thing.
Yeah, and maybe for a younger person with a similar disability, I think I'd say something that's really helped me is to, I guess, find my tribe would be like the buzzy way of saying it. Finding your people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be people in the disabled community or people who share the same lived experience that you have. But I think, and you probably resonate with this as well, Brooke, you know, you can kind of come across a person and even just speak with them for 5 minutes and just get a good feeling about them, or just know that they are for you in some way. And it's just finding ways of bringing more of those people into your circle, because there's definitely going to be some tough times, because like we spoke about earlier, the world is still anywhere where we'd like it to be in terms of, being set up for people with disabilities, and also people's attitudes are nowhere near where they should be with that. So I think having that tribe, having that community will keep you going and will keep you resilient and pointing in the direction that you're trying to get to, even when things get a little bit tougher, which they will at some point.
Yeah. So here comes, so remember when I was like, keep in mind what we're going to talk about. And I was like, I'm going to ask you this question. It's kind of going to relate to what I just said. So I like to ask everybody. So I'll preface this. So recently I was out to dinner. I was in a really nice restaurant. I'd ordered a steak because I'm not a vegan. Sorry if you are.
No, we aren't either.
And the waiter asked me when he brought me my food if I would like my dinner cut up for me. And that's never happened to me before. And I was quite taken aback by the whole situation. And then I was kind of like, I have survived my entire life on this planet without you cutting up my food. So I'm going to survive the next 40 minutes without you intervening. But like, thank you, but no thank you. Yeah. So I was wondering, as a couple, do you guys, and you will do, I'm pretty sure, what kind of intrusive, assumative, and weird questions do you guys get as a couple?
Oh, there's a lot. I think like one of the like ones that like come to mind, which is just hilarious, was this lady, it was in a comment, and she asked what she said, like, oh, like what happens if you, what happens if you get robbed? How's your husband gonna, protect you?
Oh my god.
And she used a couple of like pretty like extreme examples, like what happens if you get robbed and someone tries to attack you and your baby? What happens if you're out and there's like a bombing? Like, aren't you afraid that your husband's not going to be able to protect you? Which is it's just a bit, it's a high expectation to place on anyone, like to
let anybody
defend themselves against the terrorists. But yeah, that's one of them. What are a few others?
I think some of I find it quite hilarious and a little bit silly is when we're out as a family.
Yeah.
Like people will assume that we're brother and sister,
or that you and like
or me and my 9-month-old daughter are brother and sister, and my wife, who's younger than me, is our mother. So yeah, like people's minds can kind of just take them to a faraway land of silliness.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is the reason I wanted to ask this question, is because there are so many bizarre things that people get asked. And it's almost like highlighting, like, just as a human race, how we're all actually just so effing weird. Like we are all a bag of freaks. Like, we are.
Yeah, like when people ask these questions, it's like, wait, that's weird. Like that question's like, I guess it's directed at like, oh, this is the weird dynamic. I'm like, can't you see that that's a really weird thing to ask anyone? I don't know.
Yeah, actually, someone asked if my daughter's pram was for me.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Stop it.
The whole time she assumed that I was carrying. Yeah, it was for you.
I was in I think my daughter was like asleep in the pram and covered in a blanket.
Yeah.
So maybe she didn't see her in there, but she just quickly made the assumption that not only do I use a wheelchair, I also carry a baby stroller as a backup.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, I was like, your daughter was in the pram, right? Like this isn't because it was empty. No, she was in there as well. So just in case you fancy like a quick nap, you can hop on in.
Yeah. I mean, it would be nice, just for anyone, I think, like to occasionally be able to just take a nap.
I think about that quite a lot.
Yeah.
How great would it be if someone, like, if you could just hop into like a pre-made bed and then someone push you around your favorite shops? I would pay for that. Like,
someone needs to come up with that.
Yeah, exactly. So I only have a couple more questions for you guys, and that is, Winston, for you, Can you say that you're disabled and proud?
I can now. I think growing up, maybe I had a bit of a struggle with the word. And I think I used to almost try to run away from it and try to do everything to not see myself as disabled. And I'd even try and take on, challenges or achievements that I thought would kind of put me, away from that association.
Yeah.
So whether that be, buying my own house or, make sure that I can drive a car, be like, yeah, you see, like I'm not like those people because I can do X and Y. But I think what I've come to understand and what makes me disabled and proud is kind of what we touched about in the beginning, and that separation from, seeing Winston, the person that's disabled, and instead seeing that actually my mission is to create a world that is accessible and that supports people from all backgrounds, all abilities to thrive and be their best version.
I love that as well. And I love the fact that you touched on that actually maybe for you using the word disability was not something that you would always do, because I do think there is like a moment in the vast majority of disabled people's lives where actually at some point they push that away because stigma that is surrounded by it and how society perceives disability as this bad or other thing that you shouldn't be proud to embrace. And actually it's a beautiful thing to know that you can be in that place, but actually there is a journey to accepting disability as a part of your life, and that's pretty like empowering and powerful for people.
Yeah. And
so my last question is, are you guys an interabled couple and proud of
it? Yes, we are an interabled couple and proud of it. Yeah, it feels amazing to, I guess, one, just be in love, like regardless, and to find someone that you can genuinely share your life with, and like we have so much fun. But then it's a bonus, like, to be able to be contributing to something that, like, we really hope that, like, through our videos being out there somewhere online, it makes it easier, like, for like another disabled person growing up or someone considering getting into a relationship and realizing like how much joy there can be in it as well.
Yeah.
Guys, like, thank you so much for coming on today. I have loved this chat, and it's been so lovely to talk to you both, because I think this has been a really powerful conversation, and I've loved talking to you guys about this because I think it's going to help a lot of people, and I kind of can't wait for it, and like I'm excited to see what happens.
Thank you so much
for having us, Brooke. It was really nice speaking to you as well. You really you've got like a real sincerity about you. Like, it was really cool speaking to you.
Great questions.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Oh.